Hello and welcome to Business on the Wire. Amidst an uproar and stiff protest, two contentious farm bills were passed in the Rajya Sabha on Sunday: the Farmers' Produce Trade and Commerce Bill for 2020 and the Farmers' Agreement on Price Assurance and Farm Services Bill 2020. The bills that seek to replace two ordinances promulgated on June this year, already cleared by the Lok Sabha, were passed by voice vote in the upper house. The idea with all three bills, there's still one pending, is to liberalize the farm markets in the hope that doing so will make the system more efficient and allow for better price realizations for all concerned, especially the farmers. The central concern, presumably from these bills, is to make Indian farming a more remunerative enterprise than it is right now. However, the bills have seen widespread protests, particularly in the states of Haryana and Punjab, where the ruling BJP has now lost its ally, the Shiromani Akali Dal. To understand why the bills are being protested and what the points of concern for the agriculture sector or those who represent it are, joining me now is P. Sainath, founder editor of the People's Archive of Rural India and former rural affairs editor of The Hindu. Thank you, Sainath, for joining in and speaking with me. It's been a tumultuous couple of days, and I want to address the three bills, two of which have been passed in the Rajya Sabha now, and what the key sort of issues are around it, because it seems for a lot of people who are defending it, they feel there's not that much wrong with it. So let's start off with the first one, the Farmers' Produce Trade and Commerce Ordinance, as it was, which some people also call the APMC bypass ordinance. Explain for people watching what it means and why people within the farming community are uncomfortable with this.
I'm going to address what it means and what it is based on.
Okay.
Here you see, by the way, very briefly, these three bills. One, you have this bill that posits the APMC as the center of the evil empire.
Yeah.
And you're breaking the monopoly. The giving too much seriousness to the rhetoric of presentation and the defense by people. I heard similar defenses by the very same people when this government went in for demonetization. Okay? And after 6 months, they're all busy covering their tracks. But here you have one bill that posits the APMC as some sort of hideous monopoly from which you are, liberating the enslaved farmer, right? You have another on contracts, which the entire bill is about written agreements, but nowhere mandates written contracts. It does not mandate things in writing. It makes that voluntary. And you have one on essential commodities, which simply legalizes hoarding by removing any stocking limits by very big people. Now, the first thing, the idea that APMC is controlling everything, it's so stupid, simply because the bulk of transactions of marketable surplus in agriculture have always been outside the APMC. Most farmers, the vast majority, it varies region by region, but an incredible percentage of farmers part with their produce at the farm gate.
Yeah.
Because they've already got pre-contracts, unwritten contracts with sahukars, with commission agents, with creditors. So they're anyway releasing that there. No? They haven't realized even the MSP that is possible at the APMC. So in fact, what we're doing with this agreement, with this law, is that we are exponentially expanding the reality of non-state monopolies.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if 98% of transactions were taking place in the APMC, and you say, I want to break that, just check how many farmers actually access MSP. How many of them are able to? Because you've not been able to break farm indebtedness. You've not been able to break the hold of private profiteers over farm produce. Most farmers do not control the price of their produce anyway. Hmm. Now you're saying, you see, now please know where this comes from. It's not different from other sectors. It's an ideological, it's an ideological progression. It was there from 91 onwards with various bumps. If it hasn't had come this far yet, it's because of resistance by the farmers. It's interesting also that lakhs of farmers are resisting what we're being told is the best thing ever to have happened to them. Okay, that's another thing.
Yeah.
The third thing is that it's been done before. Okay, I'm sitting in Maharashtra. Not very far off is the Vashi APMC, where precisely this model was brought in years ago by a Congress government. And you had clipping the wings of the APMC and saying its powers are within so many square yards. Yeah, what was the purpose? The purpose was that it will bring large numbers of private markets. Corporations will invest, open up private markets, and there will be competition. The Indian corporate sector doesn't at all relish the idea of any competition. When it gets public assets from the government, it wants those neatly wrapped, gift wrapped, and delivered at their doorstep by Amazon. They're not going up. So nothing happened in Vashi. We opened this model APMC and nothing happened. No proliferation of private markets happened. Bihar, which they are all citing as a great example, did not even adopt the law. Yeah. And there has been no great profusion of private markets offering better prices either. Where? Kerala has never had an APMC Act. Yeah, it's never had. But there are no private markets. There are no giant corporate chains which have offered alternatives. Third,
yeah. Sorry,
third,
just stop the point on APMC, but please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing was that the idea that you're going to get great prices. Yeah. You know, I'm saying that the ideological, philosophical basis of this is both the most discredited idea of the last 20 years and a very simple, alluring one, which is free market is freedom and state support for the poorest of its citizens being slavery. That's what it is. Free market is freedom. Now you ought to look, Mitali, you ought to look at how well that's worked in other sectors like health. You're racing to being the worst country on the planet in the pandemic. Yeah, 98,000 cases a day, past 5 million infections, and your figures, absolutely everyone, including putting them out, no, are gross underestimates and distortions. Your rapid antigen tests, which are faulty, are far greater in number than your RT-PCR tests. And I'm sitting in Mumbai within 5 minutes walking distance and within 5 minutes drive of 3 5-star hospitals. This is the corporate sector offering you prices and choice. No one of them will you get a COVID test below 6,500 rupees, probably more like 10,000 rupees. Now, in the corporate sector, we did all these things in the health sector, released it, liberated it. Yeah, in the last budget, this government in the last budget put up district hospitals for management for private management, district level hospitals, the hospitals that you get in the district headquarters, that level. Now your model, which is completely an emulation of what's happening in the USA, is producing worse results because your people are poorer and more vulnerable. So this is the idea of free market as freedom. Now just note that advanced capitalist countries, Ireland, Spain, within the first week of the pandemic, what did they do? Nationalized everything in the health sector. Every private facility in the health sector was nationalized. What did we do? It took 2 months before the Delhi government mildly requested the corporate sector to lend it so many percentage of beds, before the Maharashtra government said 80% of beds have to be used for this. That's the difference.
Yeah.
So you're not saying something, your philosophy here is not very different from the philosophy. Look, you can apply it to the education sector. We can talk about that. Go ahead.
I just want to finish up this point about EPMC, Sainath, because I think what people don't understand are the consequences of it. So from what you pointed out, one, there is the fear of an oligopoly where large corporates come in and basically knock down prices to a point where it just doesn't make sense for farmers. And second, as you said, the experience of Bihar itself, where private mandis were set up, but instead of stabilization, there was intense price volatility. It was a 1-2 punch for the farmers, was it not?
Yeah, look, right now in this last month in Maharashtra, let's take something that happens entirely outside the APMCs. Okay, let's take the milk trade. At the beginning, I'm sitting in Mumbai. At the beginning of the pandemic, now the milk trade, there are bulk buyers. It's all that's private. There may be one state actor in it, but the bulk buyers are largely in this, get benefit largely from it. At the beginning of the pandemic, in my locality, where I am in Mumbai, we were paying 48 to 52 rupees, 48 rupees, say, for cow milk, a liter, and up to 60 rupees a liter for buffalo milk. Now, on that cow milk of 48 rupees a liter, the farmer in Maharashtra was getting 30 rupees. And that was after major struggles by farmers. After very major agitations in 2018, 2019, the farmer was getting 30 rupees on a final sale price of 48. Within a month of the lockdown, we are still paying the same price. We are still paying between 48 and 60 cow milk to buffalo milk. And the farmer from April was getting 17 rupees on the 48, where it used to be 30 a month before the pandemic. Now, so there was no APMC holding the farmer prisoner. There was no APMC depressing his price. The APMCs are extremely flawed structures. That is an entirely different conversation. But here is this transaction done entirely in the private, in the private space, where the farmer has lost almost 50% income, 45%, from 17 rupees from 30 rupees on a liter of 48 rupees. And you've seen on television the few channels that cared to carry it. Farmers' protests in August where they were pouring milk on the streets. Have you seen that? Yeah. So tell me how the APMC was the villain in that piece. The second, again I repeat, when the bulk of transactions is outside the APMC anyway, and then you're saying, oh no, the APMC will be there. Yeah, sure, it will be there. Like your government schools are there in the education sector. You've done nothing to improve them. You've done everything to facilitate the private sector takeover of education. And today you face a situation where your children are moving. We used to speak of a digital divide. Now we need to speak of a digital partition. Your poor children are completely ruled out of the education process. Have you seen, again I'm saying, don't abstract the farm bills from the same philosophy that has been functioning for 28 years, causing incredible damage. And just take again education. In the last few months, the value of a corporate called Baiju has doubled. In 12 months, from 5.5 billion to 10.5 billion, most of which growth has come under the pandemic. Now, what happens to the millions and millions? Think particularly of girls' school children. How many children, girls in the country below 15 own smartphones? I can tell you for your state, if you tell, for Bengal, I could tell you. It's, you know, almost non-existent.
Yeah.
In Maharashtra, especially when it comes to girls, they have to wait for their brother, 17 years old, working in a brick kiln, to come home Saturday, Sunday, to use his phone to download the PDFs, and they're having to pay higher packages because the normal package, the cheapest package they have, is 200 rupees for 2 GB a day. Now, if they want more and they're going to download all their textbook material, their PDFs, their learning, their classes, they're going to have to change that package upwards when they are not having any income.
Yeah.
When the entire family is sitting without any income. Now, how is it then that the corporate sector that delivers this misery in health and education is somehow going to deliver Valhalla in or Shangri-La in agriculture?
Let me pick the second bone of contention then within this entire farm construct, Sainath, which is the MSP issue, where the Prime Minister goes on record to say the government will still pay an MSP, but it's only the government that continues to pay it. I want to sort of layer this question also with the data that is available, where, according to the Shanta Kamar Committee, there's less than 6% farmers who get MSP in India. So is this the sole reason that all of Punjab and Haryana is out on the streets?
No, I think that this is an immediate provocation, but there's a hell of a lot more. They're worried about the APMCs and the assured price. Now here, Mitali, you're looking at the Shanta Kumar Commission, but after the Shanta Kumar Commission, there is something called the Swaminathan Commission. Okay. Which is a far more representative body, because it was not Mr. Swaminathan's commission, it was the National Commission of Farmers, chaired by the distinguished agro-scientist, Dr. M.S. Swaminathan, and here, just let's look at the Prime Minister's credentials on this subject. Have a quick recap of the last 6 years on MSP. 2014, I don't know how many times I have repeated myself on this. You see, the thing is that also the government and the establishment, because it's not just the government, they are calculating on the ignorance and vested interest of the media, and unfortunately, it's a sound calculation. Okay. What did they actually do? You have to judge someone by what they actually did. 2014, before the election, the Bharatiya Janata Party and the NDA promised within 12 months, some of the speeches said within 1 month, we will implement the major recommendations of the Swaminathan Commission, including and especially MSP of COP2 plus 50%. The Swaminathan Commission had a very specific measure of cost of production, which was comprehensive cost of production. They said we will implement this Swaminathan Commission recommendation on cost of production and MSP within 12 months. What did they do within those 12 months? Within 12 months, they filed an affidavit in the courts saying this is not feasible, we cannot do it, because it would lead to distortion of market prices. The very people who come to power on that promise, who got millions of farmers' votes on that promise, filed an affidavit in the courts saying, hey, we can't do this. It'll be distorting farmers' lives. That's immaterial. How can it distort the market? It can't distort the market prices. That's 2015. In 2016, Mr. Radha Mohan Singh, then Agriculture Minister, by the way, who takes these decisions, makes them? Most of the ministers in your cabinet are faceless. Find me how many editors can name the current agriculture minister. The other day, on one of your big TV channels, the BJP spokesperson could not name the agriculture minister. Yeah. He could only name Radha Mohan Singh, the ex-agriculture minister. He could not name Mr. Tomar. Okay, these are such nondescript non-entities, almost non-existent in political terms. Yeah, and so Mr. Radha Mohan Singh. So 2014, in 12 months, we will implement Swaminathan's recommendation. 2015, we can't do it. It will distort market prices. Affidavit in court. 2016, Mr. Radha Mohan Singh says, we never made any such promise. 2017, Mr. Radha Mohan Singh says uh, that forget about this damn Swaminathan Commission stuff. Please look at Madhya Pradesh. Mr. Shivraj Singh Chauhan's model is way ahead of Swaminathan. Yeah, we know the results of the Madhya Pradesh election after that. I won't go. And by the way, around the time they made all these pronouncements about Madhya Pradesh and held a function at the IIC to inaugurate someone's book, one of those leading intellectuals, on the Madhya Pradesh, which praised the Madhya Pradesh model, among other things. That was the week 5 farmers were shot dead in Mandsaur. Okay. 2018-19 budget speeches, please read Mr. Arun Jaitley's budget speech, especially the last one he gave, the finance bill speech, paragraphs 13 and 14. I'm saving you the time. Now, 14 you said implemented 12 months. 15 you said can't. 16 you said irrelevant. We never made a promise. 17 you said we are ahead in Madhya Pradesh. 18-19, the budget speech tells you that we have in fact already implemented the Swaminathan Commission. Mr. Jaitley's last speech, 13-14, we have already implemented it in the Rabi crop and are preparing to do so for the Kharif crop. Now, what was in 2020 on the floor of Parliament, your current nameless agriculture minister, Mr. Tomar, whose names no editors and anchors seem to know, and quite legitimately so, because he's so unimportant. Yeah, he says we are in defending when all the melee is on. He says we are the only party that implemented the Swaminathan Commission report. We are the only people who stood by that recommendation. We are the people who gave NSP. The trick here, as it was from 2017, was in the definition of cost of production. There are different forms of analyzing cost of production. A2. A2 is just the input cost, nothing else. Nothing else. Just what it costs for you to buy your pesticides, your seeds, your fertilizer, whatever. Another form, marginally better, A2 plus FL. A2 plus farm labor. Okay? Family labor. A2 plus family labor also took on board the cost of family labor. The Swaminathan Commission never, ever advised these two. It spoke about COP2 plus 50% comprehensive cost of production. It included farm labor. It included all the other non-recurring and other, you see, you have to look at rentals on land, all those other factors. Now, between A2 and COP2 plus 50%, you can get a difference of 800 rupees per quintal, Mitali. 800 rupees per quintal. 500 rupees more than A2 plus FL, which the government did half-heartedly implement and which was the basis for Mr. Jaitley's claims in the budget speech. So I'm saying that whole nonsense about, and of course, yes, a very tiny percent of MSP, a very tiny percent of farmers are able to access the MSP. That's why I've always said, please check the record, not only as a journalist, but as someone who participates in the Nation for Farmers Forum, that there are several demands, several issues to be sorted out, but you don't take away what exists. You know what we are saying about APMC or MSP is, the man is sick, kill him. Whereas, make that available to us. Now, what do the farmers want? The farmers are seeking assured price and stability, right? What are you imposing on them? Mad fluctuations, like the price of milk from
Mm.
from 30 rupees to 17 rupees in 30 days. So where is all this stuff about the APMC going? Now, what do I think will happen? Yeah, they are doing, see, what they have is a very clear pro-corporate intent. It may not actually materialize that way as they think. Okay, it may just materialize in devastating chaos in which middlemen will gain an even harder grip because many more farmers will be deprived of that access which they had.
Yeah.
The number of farmers stuck to private transactions without any intervention will be greater. So the thing is, if the Vashi example is anything to go by, nobody is going to come rushing in unless they're given everything on a platter.
Yeah. And in the past as well, Sainath, I think it's been amply clear that the government has always chosen the consumer over the farmer. In a sense, I suppose the MSP is actually an embodiment of the distrust that exists between the two parties. But as you pointed out, it's not the first time the farmers have come out in protest. We saw them walking the streets of Mumbai, we saw the milk protests, and now we're seeing them in Punjab and Haryana in greater numbers and spreading to the south as well. But candidly speaking, what do you think will come of this? At this point, it looks like by sheer bulk of majority, it's going to go through, perhaps the third bill as well. Do you expect the government to retrace on this? There was a suggestion of, inserting that one line saying that MSP will continue as mandated by law for any treaty. Do you think they will insert that one line, or does it look unlikely?
It is entirely, since this government is so capable of forcefully ramming through something, it is entirely capable of putting up two bills already existing as private member bills. One on guaranteeing the minimum security price, and the other on abolition of farm debt, indebtedness. Okay, it could do both these if it wanted to, but it's wanting to do this. Mitali, I differ on one formulation, that the government has always favored the consumer. No, that's not correct. It has favored the corporate world. The consumer, please don't forget that 140 million Indian farmers out of 95 million full-time farmers in the 2011 census, main cultivators, the majority, they are also consumers. Over 70% of Indian farmers, Mitali, are net purchasers of food grain on the market. Okay, so high food prices is not going to benefit them, as these guys say. High food prices are going to really hurt the farmer. 70 to 77% are the estimates of farmers who are, and then 100% are consumers.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's another thing that you've got to consider. Also consider what, look, I think that you also have to place this in the context of COVID-19 and the pandemic and what it shows you about the society we are, the kind of cruelty, the kind of inequality, glorification of inequality, that, and celebration of inequality that is part of our social setup. Okay, when on March 26th, as Mrs. Nirmala Sitaraman spoke, I wrote a piece in the Wire where I said, I am appealing that now, I think I said it there in that day in the Wire piece, which we also carried on PI Pari. I am appealing that every Indian farmer in this season, for the coming Kharif season, should shift to food crop. Because I was terrified, and still am, at the implications for food security of that 70% of farmers, many of whom in the last 25, 30 years have been bullied, coerced, coaxed, sort of coaxed into shifting into much riskier, much more expensive cash crops. Okay, now they produced a bumper harvest in Rabi in the cash crop sector, many of them. We had a huge cotton output, a huge sugarcane output. Now, Mithali, across the world, incomes have collapsed, consumption has collapsed. Who's going to buy it? Hmm? The ILO tells us that workers across the world have suffered a 60% fall in income. In Asia, Africa, Latin America, higher. In rural areas, I can assure you that is much higher. And now, and then the Rabi crop itself, you see how growth numbers don't reflect well-being. This is another simple, fundamental, philosophical point that free marketeers will never, ever bring themselves to see. They can't. Their edifice collapses with that. So what you're now having in Maharashtra by the end of July, early August, 30 lakh quintals of unsold cotton, untold lakhs of quintals, tons of sugarcane unsold, and in Kharif crop, many farmers, egged on by the state, have repeated that crop. Okay? So now you're going to, at the end of October, November, you're going to be drowning in cotton and sugarcane. Where are you going to sell it? Who's going to buy it? And okay, now another of the wonderful features of these farm bills, the man can sell anywhere he wants. Wow. Again, free market as slavery. That's what's happened to tens of millions of laborers whom we today recognize as migrant laborers. They could sell their labor anywhere. Who was taking their labor? 30 years ago, people used to come to Mumbai and go to the mills, to the industrial sector, etc. Today, they come to Mumbai and become your domestic servant and mine. Right? So, same with the farmer. He's going to be liberated. She's going to be liberated to go where, do what? Oh, yeah, they can sell anywhere where they get a better price. Can't you just see that farmer in Kanyakumari, yeah, hopping onto his bullock cart and dashing off into the sunset towards Madhya Pradesh, where he hears there's a better price for paddy? You know who's going to be from there.
I do want to address the migrant labor issue, Sainath, but before that, you have a much better finger on the pulse of what's happening with rural activity, and often the narrative is it's sort of shaped by elite media, where there is a lot of talk about a huge revival in the rural economy, looking at the two-wheeler numbers, looking at the cement sales, the fact that rural is bucking the trend. What is the situation on the ground actually for the rural farmers? Because one also takes note of the fact that the Narega numbers are the highest that they've ever been since 2006. So people are quite obviously desperate for some kind of work and some kind of living.
You said it yourself. The Narega numbers reflect this desperation. They reflect despair, not a boom. When more than 20 million people have gone back. By the way, the government saying it has no numbers on migrants and migrant deaths.
Yeah.
Firstly, the same government has given us a figure of nearly 1 crore migrants on just the Shramik trains, 91 lakhs between May 1st and May 26th, and there's another 5 days in May.
Well, okay. Now Mr. Narendra Singh Tomar says that he's collecting the data from states on migrant deaths. So that's the latest update.
The Railways Ministry gave us that data on May 27th, and you reported it in Wire, and it was reported in the media generally anywhere else. So they were already in the first 26 days of Shramik trains. Remember, from March 25th to May 1st, there were no trains, no Shramik trains. In 26 days at that time, people walked. And then people also took buses. You're not looking at a figure, one digit under 2 crores. Okay. And could be much higher. And also because we recognize as migrants very wrongly in the media, someone who's come from a village to a big city or a metro. There are many kinds of migrants. Please, if these guys would only read their damn census. Yeah. There are rural to rural migrants. They are very large in number, very huge in number. There are millions of peasants in, say, Jharkhand and Bihar who go to rural Punjab for the harvest. Okay. There are many who go within a state, without crossing a state boundary. They might go from um, Pudukkottai in Tamil Nadu to Tanjavur in Tamil Nadu for the brick making season. All these rural to rural migrations came to a grinding halt in the lockdown. Second, there are urban to urban migrations. There's a tiny percentage of urban to rural migrations. It exists. It's not large. Yeah. But there are many kinds of migrations and there are many kinds of migrants. The most vulnerable migrants are those whom the census cannot record, and the census commissioner, registrar general, has told you in the past, in a story which I reported in the Hindu, that the census does not capture properly short-term and footloose migration. The most vulnerable migrants in the country are those we call footloose migrants. Footloose migrants are those who are just moving without any clear destination or final destination. They will come from Kalahandi. You know, if you ask them on the train where you're going, they'll say Mumbai. They will come maybe to Sangli. Yeah, they will work there 90 days on a bridge project. Then the guy will tell his brother-in-law might offer them another 45 days on a building project in Mumbai. They are moving constantly. There is life of permanent insecurity and movement. High insecurity, low income, no facilities, no state service. Yeah, your recorded migrants under the Interstate Migrants Act is a grand total of 85,000. Okay, in the country. That's what your data show. So they're right in one level in saying that there's no data. But the census shows us that the movement of Indians between 2001 and 2011 is the highest in your history. So in the media, Mitali, we all ask these questions. Oh, why are they going back to their villages? You know, we're all such lovely people here. I mean, how could they possibly think of leaving us? The question the media should have asked, why did they leave their villages in the first place to come here? And that was something called the agrarian crisis, which the media chooses to underplay, ignore until it cannot.
Mm.
Now, destroyed. You were asking me about the larger picture in the rural area. What is rural distress? Rural distress is not just about agriculture. It's not only about agriculture. How many journalists or how many anchors, editors even know which is the biggest sector of employment after agriculture? It isn't IT. It isn't high tech. It is handicrafts and handlooms. These are the handlooms plus handicraft sector is the biggest employer in your country. You can check the handloom census. And you can also look at what has come out from the Craft Council over the last 20 years. They are the biggest employer of Indians after agriculture. Now, these are what also are known, the weavers, potters, craftspeople. These are allied occupations of agriculture. When agriculture tanks, they're dead. You might look, if you look at the farm suicide, you will find in many parts of this country, farmers' suicides were preceded by weavers' suicides. In Pochampalli, for instance, in the old Andhra Pradesh, Pochampalli, you had weavers committing suicide. Why? When the farmers went bankrupt, the weavers lost their market. Their first market was lost. These are allied professions. Mostly the media do not even appreciate the difference between agriculture economy and agrarian economy. Agrarian economy is much larger.
Yeah.
It includes your allied occupation, your carpenters, weavers, potters, honey hunters, fishermen. All those people are in your agrarian economy. The agrarian society are those larger sections which are dependent on agriculture. So if the economy of agriculture tanks, they're finished. For 30 years by design, we went after and smashed. What was the idea then, Mitali? We have to liberate people from agriculture, from the drudgery of agriculture, and they could go and have freely choose jobs wherever they wanted. Yeah, they could go and enter, uh, they could go and enter Cisco or uh, Infosys or so that yeah, actually some of them did enter Infosys. You'll find them in the canteen. Farmers from Mandya who are handing out chai or whatever. You'll find them in the canteens of some of these high-tech institutions. So the Vision 2020 plan of, say, Mr. Chandrababu Naidu, on the first 2 pages envisaged getting 40% of people out of agriculture. Right? So we got many people out of agriculture. Between 1991 census and 2011 census, the number of full-time farmers in this country fell by 15 million. That's on an average 2,000 per day quitting agriculture as full-time farmers. Yeah. So how do you, we did now, when the pandemic came and the lockdown came, people were making their way back to the villages to try and to looking for those livelihoods which India had spent the last 25 years killing.
One final question to you, Sainath, because we sort of lived through this in the demonetization period as well, and you mentioned, in our conversation that this MSP issue it's almost like the immediate catalyst because of which farmers are now on the roads protesting. What do you feel might be the political consequences of this? These three bills, which are now seeing nationwide protests, not just within the northern belt. What do you think might be the political consequences if these go through?
I think the immediate consequences and the medium-term consequences are chaos. You will be breaking something. A vacuum is created into which the structures that you expect to come may not come. Okay? So I think that secondly, let me clarify. The MSP may be a trigger for discontent, but it is an important thing in itself also. It is also important in itself. People are getting there is a huge search for stability in the farming community. They've been subjected to such fluctuations. See, the farmer is one person who never gets to set the price on his or her commodity. Somebody else does that. And they are subjected to murderous fluctuations of prices. Vanilla once sold in 2003, 2002 for 4,000 rupees a kilogram in Kerala. 1.5 years, 2 seasons later, it was selling at 68 rupees a kilogram. You read every year, you cover it in the wire, every year, the devastating fluctuations of onion prices in Lasalgaon. That insecurity we have condemned them to, we are now trying to institutionalize it, removing the few institutional supports. Now saying that those will be there, they will be there as lame duck institutions. They will be there. Yeah. And they will reach and serve fewer people. So what are the political consequences? I think the fact is that the most major force after the BJP NDA is opposing an action without differentiating themselves from the basic philosophy of that action. The UPA also did this. Have they learned the lesson from the pandemic? What did COVID-19 do for you? It did a complete and thorough 100% autopsy on the society you are, on neoliberalism, on capitalist development under neoliberal capitalism. Every nerve, sinew, bone, artery, vein, and sinew is on display there, and it's very ugly, including the maggots. Right? Now, you still have a Congress MP supporting the privatization of the Thiruvananthapuram airport, when every single political party in Kerala that matters in the state has opposed it. Okay, So you wanted to oppose one action, but not oppose the philosophy that those policies came from. That's why I've said often, the UPA was the gang that couldn't shoot straight. The NDA is the gang that can't stop shooting. Every direction, everywhere, anything it can hit. Just one thing, Mitali, I think I should have done better justice to one point, which is what will be the outcomes politically. I think it's astonishing me that despite the pandemic, despite the fears of infection, despite that, lakhs of farmers have been coming on the streets on one issue or the other, not just MSP. The price of milk was one issue. MSP is another. Farm debt is going to be another. I think you're going to see very, very major discontent explode in the farming community.
I really appreciate your time and thoughts today, Sainath. Thank you very much for joining in and speaking with me.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.